Welcome to the Protagonists on the World Today. Nice to have your company. It's a Thursday. Can't wait for the weekend, isn't it? Terrible. I was looking forward to the weekend on Monday. Now, we're having another panel today on the UK government's attempt to clamp down on anti-Muslim hostility. Will this be an effective strategy to reduce social tensions, or is it a policy without foundation that will make things worse? To the extent that Muslim groups are calling for more intervention, it is noted Britain already has strong laws to address hate crime and discrimination. Why is this not enough? Under the new definition released this week, anti-Muslim hostility is defined as crimes such as violence or harassment directed at people who are either Muslim or are perceived to be, as well as prejudicial stereotyping to encourage hatred against them and unlawful discrimination. The definition is not becoming law and does not mean that all anti-Muslim hostility would constitute a crime. So the question is, what's the point of this expensive new initiative? Shouldn't the government be implementing policies that properly address hate crimes directly rather than risk the creation of a backdoor blasphemy law or the use of censorship to silence criticism and, worse still, create more backlash against Muslims? Our panel today is Robin Tilbrook, solicitor and chairman of the English Democrats, Mohammed Amin, MBE, director of the Campaign for Shared European Values, and Rada Sterling, a leading UK-based human rights advocate, a crisis manager and policy consultant focusing on the UAE and the wider Middle East. Thank you very much for joining me. Robin, what do you think of this attempt to tone down hostility towards Muslims?
Well, it's certainly
we probably need to turn the microphone on, though. That's that little button that says turn me on. Get your musket out and shoot it. Here we are. We're just about right. While you're trying to find that, let me just go to Mohammed. We'll come back to you in a second, Robin. Mohammed, same question.
Good morning. There are two groups of people in Britain that face far more prejudice and hostility than others, and they are British Jews and British Muslims. And for quite a long time now, the British government has had a definition of anti-Semitism. It's the one published by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And it uses that to guide public policy, decision makers, and it also is helpful. It's been adopted by many private sector organizations as well, to tell them when their employees may be behaving badly. And remember, we're talking here about conduct which is not necessarily criminal, because we already have laws, as you said. So we've had for many years a government-supported definition of anti-Semitism. Since 2019, the government has had an independent advisor on anti-Semitism, Lord Mann, the former John Mann MP, when he used to be MP for Bassetlaw. And there's been a clear lack of an equivalent for Muslims. And I'm pleased now that the government has published a definition of anti-Muslim hostility. I'm delighted that they're not using the word Islamophobia, which has had a tortured definition for 25 years, very bad definitions. And instead, we have a nice, simple, clear definition of anti-Muslim hostility. And I understand we're going to have an anti-Muslim hostility czar like the anti-Semitism czar. What's the problem?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we're still having trouble with Robin's microphone. He might need just to do a quick reboot, and then he'll come back and we'll be able to hear him. Rada, what do you think?
I'm in two minds about it. I think obviously groups who are typically persecuted do need protection, but I am of the mind that we do have pre-existing laws that cover such harassment, discrimination, and incitement to violence. And I think perhaps emphasizing two particular groups too much can have the opposite effect. And I think that it also it brings back that feeling for British citizens that there is a two-tier system of justice, there's a two-tier system of law enforcement and of cancel culture, something that people have rebelled against and opposed for years now, and have just, in a sense, felt that they've been liberated from the historic cancel culture that we've seen over the past 10 years. And I feel that bringing this back and failing to address other concerns of equality is going to have the opposite effect and really get people to be even more, have even more animosity towards these groups. I mean, you have a mainstream media, you have a government, you have politicians who are constantly referring to certain groups of people as supremacists, Nazis, of far right activists. And at the same time, people are not able to have the same equal criticism for these other groups without facing potential imprisonment. And so I think this issue is going to spark those really deep feelings of animosity towards these groups.
It's one of those nights, I think, we just lost Rada then. There she's come back again. It's just one of those nights. The internet is magnificent sometimes. I have to ask you, Mohammed, while Robin is trying to come back to us, to planet Earth, are the hate laws or the hate crime laws simply not working?
The laws for what is criminal work, but they deal with crimes. What we're talking about here is bad behavior, which is not criminal behavior.
Sorry, we are having a magnificent night here. Rada, if you could, there we are, look at that. That's still not working, there we are. We're just like, it's like those, those, got the gun out and shooting those things at the show. Rada, what do you think? You think the laws, the crime laws aren't working?
I think that there is a two-tier system of justice enforcement and culture generally, and that can cause even more animosity towards these groups where, especially British citizens, a large portion of them feel that their concerns are going unanswered, that there is a reason or a justification that seems to be growing in that animosity. And I think that censorship is not the answer. I think that demonizing people for holding these sorts of points of view, especially in regards of immigration, is going to be an issue that comes out of this. And I think it is counterproductive. I think that reporting on people for their non-criminal points of view and gathering that sort of intelligence is the first step to a more dystopian society. And I think that people should be concerned about that kind of intel gathering, profiling of people who have these sorts of points of view. I do think that British citizens have seen a two-tier system of the application of the law, and also the media in the fact that they're willing to cover up the crimes of certain races and religions, but amplify white British nationals. And I think this two-tier also perception in the media is causing that very animosity that now the government is talking about trying to protect against. But I think the reason and the core issues that this animosity exists, or that this targeting of certain races exists, is largely due to government policy and its failure to listen to its citizens and what they really want in the country.
And we have Robin back now. Robin, are these laws simply not working? These hate law, crime hate laws, are they just not working? Why else would they be digging deep to bring in new restrictions?
Okay, well, I think that part of the reason that Labour are doing this is because they think that they need the support of the Muslim ethnic communities and enclaves that we've now got in many of our major cities. And so it's an electioneering gimmick, I think, rather than anything else. We're already in a situation where most English people think that the system is discriminating against us rather than us discriminating against Muslims. Far from that. I think the general impression is that Muslims have been given a much easier ride, and there is very much a two-tier system of justice. I think this will contribute to that feeling of a two-tier system of justice and the feeling that the British political establishment and state is discriminating against the English.
Can you, well, I'll keep this to you, Rob, and then I'll come to Mohammed. Why isn't there a focus on policing the laws rather than more social engineering?
Well, one of the things that we've got in this country where we find that almost nothing works, one of the institutions that hardly seems to work is the police. They are not very efficient, not very effective. They rarely clear up crimes, particularly the sort of crimes that most people care about, like burglaries, robberies, and so on. They're pretty inefficient at that. And also, our court system is clogged up. Basically, there have been very ill-advised cuts that have occurred in the court system over the years, and we're now left with a huge backlog of cases, so that the criminal justice system is very inefficiently administered and is not working terribly well.
Mohammed, same question to you. Why isn't there a focus on policing the laws rather than more social engineering? Because people can see through this.
Because the issue here isn't criminal behavior. The issue is bad behavior which falls below the standard of criminal behavior, but which should properly be called out. And that's why the Jewish community for a long time has wanted and come up with and agreed a definition of anti-Semitism, which has been adopted by both the government and by all political parties and by very many private sector organizations and businesses. So, for example, if you've got an employee who is behaving anti-Semitically, that can be a reason for sanctioning the employee. We're not talking about criminal behavior. And it's exactly the same point with anti-Muslim hostility, except there has never been a definition adopted by the government until now.
Rada, the same thing. And I would dare say that if people get tired of having something shoved down their throat, they know this is politicking Labor-wise, but at the same time, it's still shoving, things down people's throat. And at the moment in the UK, there's enough of that going on, either with hard and fast laws or insinuations. Probably doing more damage than good, isn't it?
I think so, and it's manifested itself in ways where security guards are feeling that they can't report someone with a suspicious backpack for fear of being called racist. And I think that's what this does. Again, people are tired of being called racist, and they definitely don't want to be called out for non-criminal behaviour as well. And a profile created about them, I think it's extremely dangerous. I do believe that implementing any sort of practice in the education system or the police system is going to actually backfire in the long term. I think that already the British police have struggled to enforce the laws equally. There's definitely a two-tier system. And the British citizens are concerned about Sharia law. They're concerned that the British police also haven't taken seriously abuse claims from women who are from Muslim families, because the police don't want to intervene in another religion because that's seen as discriminatory. And again, I think this is just going to drive it home. It is going to backfire in the sense that, crime is going to go unpunished. And there will be a two-tier system that leads to serious, deep-rooted resentment from citizens, and that's what we're seeing more of. We're seeing more of these protests, more anti-immigration sentiment, and a media that hates the people who say that has in the past, led to an almost revolution, a revolt of those people who are outraged that they feel that their country is being taken over. And I think this is only going to make them feel more of that sentiment. What is the British government doing to appease the people with those genuine concerns?
Robin, I just was just thinking, and it's terrible of me to insinuate this, but the Free Speech Union says this is pure Labor politics to attract the Muslim vote. Now, I will go to church later and I will drink some holy water, which will most likely cause my throat to burn and my head to explode. But I would dare say this is politicking Labor style, isn't it? And it really is. It's. I mean, the good folk of the UK, they can see this, and so what they're doing is the government is undoing even more of what they not stranglehold, but what they can do in Parliament. They're seeing now that the people are seeing that the government will stop at nothing to try and keep their supporter base at least reasonable. It's all going to come apart. What do? You just sit there and watch this happen, or is there a way that besides having an early election, what can we do to bring things back to being normal? Because Rada is right. It's very, very confusing. The coppers can't check people because it's racial profiling, and it makes your whole society almost unworkable.
It's definitely getting more and more unworkable. I think you're right, and we do have a very much an obvious two-tier system of enforcement. Basically, the English population have traditionally been very willing to consent to policing, and they expect the police to be being decent, common sense, reasonable. Those expectations are generally not met when, in fact, we've got one of these type of instances going on. As far as Labour is concerned, they are worried about losing the support of the Muslim enclaves, and we also see this in the way that they're treating the question of an inquiry into the Pakistani Muslim child rape gangs that have operated across the country, and many tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of white English girls being raped and groomed and trafficked and pimped across the country. The authorities basically colluded with that and covered it up for decades, and we're now in a situation where, far from being prejudiced against these Muslim gangs, the Labour Party are basically trying to cover this up, and they're ducking and diving to try and make the inquiry as of little effect as possible.
What do you practice law? I mean, you do more than practice it. You do it very well, so you don't need much practice at all. But I just think in Australia we have, and Rada will be aware of this, in Queensland, there's a new law that's come in. You can't mention from the river to the sea. You can't think it, you can't mention it, you can't scribble it, otherwise they will arrest you. That came in today. Two people have been arrested, one in particular, a girl, for wearing a T-shirt from the river to the sea. And she, according to reports, is facing 2 years jail. Now, this is an 18-year-old girl. So I would dare say there was a protest in wearing that in the first place, but I think it's very, very unfair that this would be a jailable offence for 2 years. How do you think something like that would go in the UK?
Well, I just think what's happening is that people are getting more and more aware of the kind of anti-English discrimination that the state's been practicing for a while, and people are becoming more and more resentful of it. And we saw this recently with the Raise the Flags movement, where most of our transport infrastructure now is every now and again you see a cross of St George or maybe a Union Jack flying, and people have put those up to show that we are actually getting rather fed up with this kind of treatment, and it really is an indicator that people are saying that this shouldn't be happening in our country.
Mohammed, same question to you. In this country, in Queensland, you can go to jail now. Came in day one in Queensland. To wear a T-shirt, which says "From the river to the sea," and I know there are the implications there. but it would mean that, or would imply that government has lost the plot. I mean, instead of having a discussion with those people, as one of our politicians said, who is right behind Israel, but he said that perhaps we should have conversations and show them, if we can, that they're wrong. Now, whether I believe that or not, but at least what it means is that you have a communication. But to grab an 18-year-old girl for wearing that on a T-shirt and saying that she could very well be locked up for 2 years, it would probably show you that society or government has lost the plot. What do you think?
It's not simple. I mean, I don't want to comment on Queensland law because I haven't read it, but if we talk about the UK, it is quite clear in the UK that it is a criminal offence, the law says this, to support a designated terrorist organisation. So if you walk around the UK wearing a T-shirt which says, I support Hamas, for example, that will actually get you locked up, because Hamas is a designated terrorist organisation, and therefore expressing support for a designated terrorist organisation is a crime. I think from memory, this dates back to the days of Tony Blair.
Rada, this could almost be an infringement on human rights. First of all, that does not imply that they support Hamas or any terrorist organisation, and I think it's just an 18-year-old having an opinion and pushing the arrow a bit too far. However, having said that, and you're a Queenslander, or sort of, you're in Cairns. You can't get much further away from Brisbane than that. But it would show you that, in my opinion, and this is a Conservative government too, it would show you that government, in my opinion, has lost the plot.
I mean, the problem is, when there's a terrorist attack or a major incident, of course, the government immediately wants to use that to introduce restrictions. And if there's a disaster like COVID, okay, more laws are going to be passed. And it's just really an excuse to gain more control over citizens. And that's where I'm sort of across the board. I don't want to see a young girl locked up for wearing a T-shirt, a protest T-shirt, misguided perhaps, but I don't think she needs to see the inside of a prison. And it crosses what I do with clients in the UAE. I've seen people arrested for wearing a T-shirt with a almost naked body on there, promoting skin cancer prevention, and they saw the inside of prison, and I just thought that was okay. They did the wrong thing, but the punishment is just absolutely extreme. And I think that as soon as we start supporting this kind of thing following a terrorist attack against Jewish people and the Jewish community, which was horrendous, obviously, we open the doors for such behavior against any organized group of people or any political belief, any religious belief. And very soon the government has complete control over literally everyone in society. And I think we do need to be careful of that and be balanced in the way that we enforce what we want to see out of our citizens. And perhaps education is the way, perhaps selling our ideas properly to people and inviting that debate and hoping that people can see the right way. And that positive energy in society. And I don't think that clamping down in this way is the solution, is the answer. It's only going to lead to an over-controlled population with an all-powerful government that can almost lock up any one of its citizens. I think that's where we're heading if we're not careful. At the moment, I think people are championing it. They're cheering it on, whatever group it is. Muslims, Israelis, and various other groups wanting these restrictions, and then all of their supporters advocating for it as well, because of course our hearts bleed when someone is targeted, someone is harassed, someone is beat up in the streets. We don't want to see that as a society. But what we don't realize is having that warm heart towards people in that situation and wanting to protect them can lead ultimately to empowering our government too far beyond what we should be doing, given the fact that we already have pre-existing laws that cover this.
It's interesting. The for years, the Aboriginal community, and I'll keep this with Rada at one, just for another 20 or 30 seconds, and the Aboriginal community were told by the white people what they, who had little knowledge, what they need to do. And what they did was they gave them a lot of money, didn't care what happened to them. There was no say in what they did with their lives, except they drank a lot and did some, went through a terrible, terrible time. And then we have David Crisafulli. Now, I don't think David Crisafulli is Jewish or from Israel or Jewish. He's just he's just like everybody else, which the Jews are too. However, when they start coming out, and you see Chris Minns in New South Wales, you see the Prime Minister, you see Jacinta Allen in Victoria, and they're all doing the same thing. They're becoming quite virtuous, quite, I'm holier than thou, and I'm going to lead you through this. I'll part the water, and I'll show you how to get through from this terrible place to utopia. And you're right, Rada, because I can see governments, which is just horrific, having more power and more power and more power, and it was all based on being a nong in the first place. Just quickly, your thoughts on that. You may not have to relate or talk about their mental capacity. I'm just saying they're a bunch of nongs.
Absolutely. And I think when 9/11 happened, that was my first thought and consideration is, what rights and freedoms are we now going to lose? And we know that we lost them and we're continuing to lose them. I think with artificial intelligence, it's the beginning of a very dark era for surveillance control. And I'm opposed to anything like this that's happening in Britain that would seek to expand that control, whether criminal or non-criminal, and the way that they enforce that through recording information about people and making their lives miserable.
I totally agree, Robin. It's like I look at Starmer, and whether I'm just imagining it, but I see froth coming out of his mouth. I can see he's got hoofs, and he's ready for that big gallop towards the finishing line. The finishing line, in most people's opinion, is probably the destruction of the UK, make it divisive as possible. Harry Miller said the other day, put a wedge between one group and another group and divide and conquer. That's what's going to happen to the UK, isn't it? It's going to have this wedge between community groups, whether you're Muslim, Christian, whether you're Martian, whatever. He would love to have that wedge so there's none of this togetherness, none of this unity. Do you see the same thing as I see, that the UK is heading towards what David Crisafulli, Premier of Queensland, would like it to be, government control? You will do exactly as we say. You will have no right to even think about anything other than what we want you to think about. Otherwise, we'll arrest you with our thought police. The future doesn't look great, does it, for the UK, considering that he's still got another couple of years left, or Labor's got another couple of years left.
Yes, it's certainly worrying, Mike, the way that things are going. But I do think this is what's happening here is, to some extent, a part of the way that state multiculturalism operates here. What multiculturalism purports to be is that all the different communities have their ways are treated as all being of equal value, and part of multiculturalism in the way it's being applied in England is that we've got Sharia courts deciding what happens within Muslim communities, and I think that what we're really seeing with this particular policy initiative of trying to create a anti Muslim hostility regime is more about sort of asymmetric multiculturalism. In other words, multiculturalism is applied to give rights to various communities, immigrant communities, but what's happening is that the system then bears down against the English, the indigenous host community, as it were, and we are the English people are generally getting more and more aware of what's going on, and I think they're also beginning to feel that the state is hostile to the English, and they're right to think that because that is so.
Mohammed, how do we bring the temperature down to between these groups? How do we bring it back to some sort of level-headedness that the humans used to have? They used to talk about things without getting, going over the top.
Well, first of all, I dispute your fundamental premise that there is a temperature problem, and I disagree strongly with what Robin's been saying about the state of integration in the UK. The UK is the most successfully integrated country in Europe. And I've lived in the UK since 1952. There was far more racism around in the 1950s and the 1960s than there is now. With every year that goes by, there are more people, first of all, there are more mixed marriages. There are more people changing their religion in all directions. Uh, there are growing numbers of Muslims in Britain who are white British by ethnicity, because Islam is not a race, it's a belief system. And the idea that we have a big problem with integration is one that is peddled regularly by right-wing political parties for political purposes. It's also promoted quite heavily by certain, but only certain parts of the media. If you read quality newspapers like the Financial Times and The Economist, they're very clear about our successful integration as a society. But some papers choose to try to sell fear as a way of promoting basically newspaper circulation.
Robin, before you pop in, because I think you would like to have a retort, I just want to, first of all, it's not the right wing that are doing this. At the moment, I think it's a Labor government. I could be wrong. Anyway, I would imagine they're left. Maybe I'm wrong too. And if what you say, or what Mohammed says is right, then why are they introducing all these new laws, new social media campaigns? Maybe they are a right-wing Labor Party. Maybe
No,
not.
certainly not. I mean, most of the leading figures within the Labour government are Fabians, and their agenda is revolutionary in effect, but not through violent revolution, but through gradually changing society. And in particular, they are quite hostile to the nation state, the Fabians. And I think a lot of the policies that are being adopted at the moment are really quite hostile to our nation state. And I think this initiative is another example, really, of that hostility, because it's not an even-handed policy. It's a policy to give special rights and consideration to Muslims, and certainly the example that Mohammed was talking about of the anti-Semitism definition, that was a definition that was devised in effect by the Israelis to try and make sure that comments about Jews and Israelis that were negative would be treated as anti-Semitism. So we've now got a bizarre situation where if you were saying that there was a Russian man who was acting in the interests of Russia and pushing Russian interests within the British government lobbying system, and he's the Russian ambassador, that would be fine. But if you said exactly the same things, but it was about pushing Israeli interests, and it was the Israeli ambassador, that would be anti-Semitic according to this definition.
Rada, would you like to also have a piece of that? Because Mohammed, we'll come back to you in a second, Mohammed, just to have a retort also. But it would seem, though, that the government, which is left-wing, or is left, very left, in the UK, and it would seem that the government in Australia, the federal government, left. So what Mohammed said, that it was these right-wing groups and newspapers trying to get clickbait, I would probably think that's not quite correct.
I think it's something that's been building up for such a long time in the United Kingdom, and it's all well and good to say that, it's an integrated society, that it's been very successful multiculturalism, because in certain areas it has. But the issue is, and the people did vote for Brexit for primarily the reason of over immigration. And that means that, people have been coming in from war zones, people have been coming in and committing crimes. People feel at risk. People feel that their government's been taken over, that Sharia law is becoming an issue. So when you look at it that way, has there really been a successful multiculturalism when we need the government apparently to come in and introduce laws specifically to protect a certain group of people? Now, many have integrated very well, but when we bring people in from war zones and create risk for people just going about their normal life and hoping their children don't get murdered on the way to school, when people start having to change the way that they live and the way that they exist because it's no longer safe or they don't feel safe, and then the government, rather than looking at the core issues and how the people really feel about this and what can they do, they choose to try to censor people and to ram down their throats a narrative that multiculturalism is the best thing that happened to Britain. Whereas unity is strength. I'm not seeing as much unity as I used to. And it's really unfortunate, but I don't think that it's right to deny it or to believe these certain headlines coming out from certain media houses, because of course there is many conflicting opinions here, and I think more than 50% of Britons would agree that there is a problem with immigration, that there is a problem with integration, and that doesn't make them racist. It doesn't make them, hating on certain groups or anything. It's a serious issue, and the government wants to cover it up.
Mohammed, now you can reply. And
Well, first of all, I'd like to reply
Yeah.
to Robin, because what Robin has just demonstrated earlier in his comments about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism tells me that he hasn't read it properly. As a lawyer, you have to read the whole document, and it's quite clear that everything is context specific. And the mere fact that you accuse somebody of, if somebody is actually acting for the Israeli government in an unlawful way, that would be equally unlawful if it was acting for the Russian government. The way that you describe the IHRA definition working is simply not correct. I recommend you go back and read it in full.
Robin, over to you.
So I have read it in full. I know what it says, and the example that I gave of the two ambassadors and the way that that definition would treat the comments is correct, and it's not an even-handed legal definition. It's intended to advantage a particular group, and in particular, in this case, to clamp down on criticism of Israel, and I think that is that is the agenda that many Islamist people have been pushing for with sort of Islamophobia laws. They're looking to try and clamp down on the ability of people to say perfectly common sense things about Islam, and that is, I think, a part of the fact that asymmetric multiculturalism doesn't work for the general majority population. We're being basically excluded from quite a lot of what goes on within the state. The idea of these rules coming in, that will influence the way that state organisations operate, and it will influence it in a way that's basically discriminatory towards people who have ordinary common sense English views. And I'm sure it's intended to do so. And it is part of the package that we get with Labour, where they're not prepared to do a proper investigation into their failures over the decades to properly deal with criminal activity by Pakistani Muslim child rape gangs.
Well, first of all, the way that you've described the anti-Muslim hostility definition published by the government on Monday shows that you're simply paying no attention to the actual words of the definition. And I recommend that you read my analysis of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition to understand why your interpretation of it is simply incorrect.
Well, can I just say
It's on my website.
it's not incorrect, and we do have examples of people who have mentioned, for instance, activity by the Israeli embassy when Labour had their internal problems over anti-Semitism, and Corbyn was basically holding out against the adoption of this definition because he felt it was biased and actually rather discriminatory. But what happened was that one of his allies mentioned that a lot of the opposition to Corbyn was being orchestrated from the Israeli embassy. That ally, when Starmer became leader, got kicked out of the Labour Party.
Well, anybody else? No?
Chris Williamson, I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Mohammed.
Chris Williamson was kicked out of the Labour Party for expressing clearly anti-Semitic views, but they were not. I go back to the definition itself, and you're simply misinterpreting it. We'd have to sit down with the definition, and I could show you word by word. There is a full analysis on my website, and on the website you'll see clearly highlighted the words in the definition that you're ignoring, the link between the actual definition and the examples. You, like many other people, ignore the actual words that are used to connect the examples to the definition itself.
So the definition is not a legal document. It is a political agenda. And to get too legalistic about it is to miss the whole point.
Rather, the conversation between Mohammed and Robin would indicate there is great confusion. And that's probably part of it, isn't it? Because you have a government that's releasing like they're throwing out pamphlets from a plane high above the sky. All this stuff comes flying out. And where it's landing, people are looking at it, and this one piece of paper says red is red, and the other piece of paper says red is blue. And so no one really knows exactly what is meant by the government. And for this, as Mohammed said, it's only done by the right wingers. This Starmer is obviously a right wing left government. Yes. And so therefore the confusion that has been thrown out. I put a question to you also, Rada, if you wouldn't mind just answering what I've said, but also, is this done on purpose?
I think it certainly helps to be unclear and to cause confusion. They don't want to necessarily be nailed down to a particular thought. It means they can be general, and depending on the public's reaction or as time goes by, they can kind of change what they've said. I think that possibly the biggest issue here is the effect that it's going to have on institutions. We saw what happened with girls in boys' lockers and the way that the NHS was treating, the genders and giving all this gender-affirming care to children without parents' consent, and how that sort of moved just because of these conversations that the government had. They didn't necessarily bring things into law, and having the same conversations again changed that policy significantly. I think that being vague is helpful, but at the same time, they're sending a very, very clear message to the police and to the hospitals and to the authorities, the education facilities, that they want to treat Muslims in a different way than they will treat white ethnic British nationals. And I think that's clear British citizens who are white and have certain political views do feel that they're more likely to be persecuted. I mean, we saw Lucy Connolly locked up for as long as we did in England, and I think that was outrageous. And I think that's only going to continue. I think this is going to further encourage authorities to treat people like Lucy Connolly in the same way and give them more power to not just legally prosecute them and jail them, lock them up and censor them and take away their social media accounts and so on, but also go after their employers, go after anyone whom they've rely on for their income and target them in that way. Sort of what we saw in Canada during COVID with the truckers and so on. I think it's a way for the government to give sort of soft power throughout British society. And I'm sure that the native Brits are going to feel certainly that way. The white British people will feel that this is an attack on them.
Robin, Harry Miller, who's an ex-copper, was on, I think it was last night, such a long time ago, said police had been shown not to be able to take political guidance on social matters such as these. So you would probably assume more people will be wrongly addressed or questioned by the police. How do we, because they're the ones that are upholding, inverted commas, the law, or following the direction of the said government. But if you look at the police and the grooming gangs, and you look at the police and people's social media and how they approach it, hello, that's what you're getting at the door now. And so do we have a lot of confidence in the police being able to do the right thing? And the question is also hanging over this is that the grooming gang inquiry is a bit like a Stephen King novel or a movie. It's never going to happen. But the grooming gang inquiry, which also implicates, just the whispers are, it implicates the senior members of the police force and government ministers. Do you have any confidence in that the police will be able to do anything except what they're doing now, and that's scaring the bejeebers out of the good folk of the UK?
So I do agree with Harry Miller, and you're right. He's a former policeman himself, so he's got a good grasp of what's been going on. Within the police, there's been a politicised appointment system for a long time, and basically, if you're a sort of Labour type supporting person, you're much more likely to be promoted than somebody who is thought to be more traditionally minded and patriotic, perhaps. In fact, actually, if they come out with remarks that are actually patriotic, that could be a career ender for many police officers. But the idea that the police are even-handed in the way that they police is just complete non-starter in this country now. And Rada's absolutely right to talk about the Lucy Connolly case. There's a woman who tweets something that makes it might be so offensive what she said. She rethought it and removed it. When the police turned up, she thought basically they were sort of common sense type approach would apply. She hadn't previously been involved with the police at all. She'd never done anything that got the police into her life. So she hadn't got any grasp of the way they now operate. So she then spoke to them and gave a statement that led to her being arrested and charged. And very foolishly, she then pleaded guilty rather than insisting upon a jury trial. If she'd had a jury trial, probably the jury would have acquitted her, as has happened with several others. But we've got a system which pressures people who are thinking that the system is still being run in a fair, reasonable way, but it isn't. And people need to understand that that's the case, and not think that they're going to get fair treatment. They need to fight their corner, and that's simply a lesson that people have to learn now in England.
From memory, Lucy Connolly's offence was incitement to murder, was it not?
No.
What was it?
It was a racial hatred crime that she was.
She wanted hostels to be burnt down with the people inside it. That's what I recall.
It wasn't an incitement to murder conviction. No.
But she wanted people to be burnt to death inside hostels.
She made a comment on Twitter along those lines, but the fact is she did remove this before the police arrived. She rethought it. What happened was, after Axel Rudakabana, who's a black African originated boy, and he was the lots of false stories were being put out by officials and the police about a Welsh choir boy or something like that. Whereas it then turned out that people started to realise that he was of Rwandan origin, and so people started speculating wildly that this was a Muslim attack. They speculated wildly that it was somebody who just literally got off one of these boats that come across the channel, and in response to that, she tweeted this out. Once the story started to become clearer that actually his parents were refugees, and his although it does appear that he might well be a Muslim from what we hear about him, because he got the Al Qaeda handbook. In fact, the story wasn't really what people thought, and I think at the time people were feeling that we've got all these vast numbers of people coming across illegally, and the state, far from doing anything about it, are actually welcoming them and accommodating them, often in 4-star hotels, and people generally in the English population are getting more and more fed up with this.
Mohammed?
We have a crime on the statute book. Lucy Connolly committed that crime and was prosecuted for it, pleaded guilty, and was jailed. What's the issue?
And it is worth remembering that the reason why she was prosecuted for the offence that she was prosecuted is because the Labour Attorney General, who's a personal friend of Starmer, Lord Hermer, authorised it. So, in other words, she was deliberately picked out and victimised, and I suspect it was partly because her husband is a Conservative councillor.
Okay, we can keep going backwards and forwards, which actually I'm half tempted to, but then we'll go very late. I just want to ask you, just finally, and I'll keep with you, Robin, at this stage. Are there better solutions than social engineering and trying to shut people up? And what are they?
Well, the trouble is, we are where we are now. We've had decades of increasing mass immigration. We've got a situation where quite sizable parts of our towns and cities have got enclaves of various different groups, and people have chosen to live in ways that are like sort of ghettos, really. So we've just had a by-election, Gorton and Denton, and one of the headlines that I was reading was how Gorton beat Denton. And the Gorton is an area which is basically Pakistani Muslim dominant group, and Denton is a sort of white working class English area. And the fact is that the left there were able to galvanise support from the Pakistani Muslims, so they turned out to vote much more than the English people did, and so we what we've got going on now is the development of sectarian voting, and that is a development which will carry on and develop and get worse.
Mohammed, same question. Are there better solutions than social engineering and trying to shut people up? And what are they?
Well, first of all, as I said earlier, our country is a great success when it comes to integration. And the anti Muslim hostility definition is needed because Muslims, like Jews, are the two groups in Britain which face the greatest levels of hostility. And it's helpful to have a definition both which explains what is anti Muslim hostility, but equally, once you've got a clear definition, you know what is not anti Muslim hostility. And it would help having a clear definition actually stops people being accused of things that they haven't done because they can point to this definition and say, no, I'm not doing that. And I would also like to just say something about Gorton and Denton, because again, Robin has misrepresented the facts. The Muslim population of Gorton and Denton is about 30%. Reform, Matthew Goodwin was a terrible candidate. He was beaten because Gorton contains large numbers of people who are socially progressive white British as well as Muslim voters. And it is quite, there was the Labour and Green vote was much bigger than the Reform vote. The only way Reform could have won is if the vote had been evenly split. But even in a perfect even split, would have still, of the non-Reform vote, would still have meant that Reform lost. It's totally misrepresenting it to say that Reform was beaten because of Muslim voters and nothing else.
I'm tempted, but actually, don't say a thing, Robin, otherwise we'll never go home. Errata, finally, are there better solutions than social engineering and trying to shut people up, and what are they?
Well, I think firstly, stop protecting certain groups but not others, because that is creating two-tier, is creating resentment and having the opposite effect. Next thing is stop censoring people. So, Lucy Connolly, for example, shouldn't have been targeted, singled out as she was. I mean, if you look at the details of that case, it was outrageous that she was put in jail, certainly for as long as she was, and that she was essentially intimidated into pleading guilty, something that unfortunately she did, and probably would have won the case had it gone to a jury trial. I think the next thing is governments need to stop ramming what they want down our throats and start listening to us. And that means more democracy. I think that there needs to be an avenue for people to have more of a say, not less of a say. Currently, the climate is from the government to shut down our opinions, to shut down our voices, and to do everything that they can to demonize opinions. And I think the best thing for society would be is if the government and everyone else actually listened to people's concerns without blaming, without pointing the finger, and without this kind of still underlying cancel culture. So I think there should be more democracy, more polling, more interaction, more debate. And I think that that would certainly go a long way to reduce animosity against all groups.
I'm going to be very, very naughty if you don't mind. I got something I just want to mention to Mohammed. I'd like him to answer this, and then if anybody wants to say something after it, please do. So I need to clear things up in my mind, Mohammed. If everybody in the UK were regarded as equal, so therefore equal respect for religion, equal respect for cultures, equal respect goes on. Is that what is being sought after at the moment?
Yes.
Okay. My next part of this is, and I'm not meaning to be inflammatory by any stretch, but if you look at the great comedians from and great TV shows, the Naked Vickers show, you look at Dick Emery, you look at Dave Allen, Benny Hill, Monty Python, that group of characters, they all made fun of, enormous fun of Christianity. That's part of the culture of Western society. And if you even look at some of the films Monty Python had made, they were pretty wild. Now I'm a Catholic and I'm a Christian, went to a Catholic school. And I've watched some of those movies and watched Benny Hill, Dave Allen, many, many hundreds of times. It doesn't mean that I'm any less respectful of my religion. Now, if something like that happened with Islam, with Muslims, that you had the same sort of tongue-in-cheek comedy, which is, again, very Western, very British, very Australian. Can you tell me what would happen?
Well, first of all,
No, I just need
comedians,
to know what would happen.
there are some Muslims who would get very upset. They would be wrong to do so. And as far as I'm concerned, you can make. There are plenty of Muslim comedians who will make jokes about Islam and make jokes about other Muslims.
Okay, so tell me this: why is if I cracked it or made a joke about about Muslims or Islam or Muhammad, and I base it on something that Dave Allen or Benny Hill or Monty Python had used, I can bet you 10 cents to 1 million quid that I'd have a knock on the door from the police, and I would probably follow Lucy Connolly, but in a male section of the jail. So why is that then permitted? But I can make jokes about the Christian religion, about the Pope Mobile and all that sort of stuff, and nothing will happen. Yet if I'd said something about, which I wouldn't do, but if I'd said something about Muhammad or Islam, I can tell you now that I would have about 24 hours before I received a visit from the police, whether it's in Australia or in the UK.
I won't comment on Australian law, but
hang on, I've been finished.
Yep.
And that's why we have this, at the moment, this impasse, and it will always remain an impasse, because the government, at the bequest of some cultures, are trying to change the culture that they immigrated to in the first place. And when you go to someone's house, you show respect, and they are in someone's house. And then if they've been there for a long time, that is their house. But you don't change the house. You don't change the culture. And that is why we're at this impasse at the moment.
I won't comment on Australian law. I do not believe that you could be criminally prosecuted in the UK.
No, but I'm just saying, sorry, if I made a joke about Islam, Robin, would I, and it was a Dave Allen sort of joke, or Monty Python, or the Naked Vicar, as a lawyer, Robin, would you assume that I've invited the police to question me vigorously?
Well, we know that the policing in this country is very, very humorless on these type of things. I mean, we had a comedian who'd got his dog to raise its right paw when I think Hitler was mentioned, and the result was he wound up being prosecuted. And we do have a very unequal way of administering law in this country, and I think it's partly because the police and the authorities are simply frightened of Muslim extremism, and so what they do instead is they clamp down on the population that they don't think will fight back, which is the English. So just to give an example of the kind of approach that we've got a Batley teacher who was following the official guidance as to what should be taught in a religious education lesson, and showed an image of Muhammad to the kids. There's then a Islamist series of protests outside the school. He has death threats. He has to go into hiding. He's still in hiding years later, and the authorities have done nothing to help him.
I agree. The authorities let that teacher down really badly. And actually, one of the reasons I think the authorities might have been concerned that if they supported the teacher, they were accused of being Islamophobic. A definition like the one that the government published on Monday would make it quite clear that standing up for that teacher would not be anti-Muslim hostility. And that's one of the values of having a definition like this.
I don't think it will make the police or any part of the authorities do their duty. The law was very clear about what they ought to have done over the child rape gangs, but they didn't do it out of probably corruption, but also fear of the Muslim reaction.
I would think that the conversation that just followed, it shows you that we're in this whirlpool. There is little tolerance, no respect, government interfering. What we need, and I think we all agree, is that we need to be able to talk as people to other people again. And if I disagree with someone, I say, I disagree with you. Might get a bit excited, but that's all it is. And that's what is not happening at the moment. We have government stepping in, becoming the moral adjudicator on how you are supposed to think, act. And I understand why there is this garbage happening in the UK. People want their own country to be their own country. They want the UK to be the UK, or those countries involved. They don't want it transferred to another culture or to another way of thinking. They don't want that. That's part of being a Brit, or in Australia, part of being an Aussie. We don't want things to change a whole lot. It's lasted us a long time. We want it to stay the same. Sure, make the edges a little less sharp, but at the moment, what the UK government is doing, along with other governments, it is changing the inherent culture and the inherent soul of that particular country. And I agree, people do not want that. It shouldn't happen. And I think it's everybody's right to voice themselves, protest, do what they need to. And that poor girl that wore that thing on her T-shirt, I mean, that is a disgrace. And I think we need to fight harder and stronger. Otherwise, the UK you have and the Australia that we have, it will be no more. And we've got to do more than just talk about it. So that's just my opinion. So I apologise if I've been a bit over the top. We need to stop this shit, get on with being, just living life. Life's too short. Robin, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Well, I'm on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is at Robin Tilbrook.
Mohammed, thank you for being part of this panel. If somebody wanted to find out more about you, how do they do that?
The Campaign for Shared European Values stands up for the things that we inherited from the European Enlightenment. If you Google our name or go to our website, csev.org.uk, you'll find out more about us. And there's even a picture of me on the website because I'm one of the directors.
Good on you. And RADA, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Just X at Rada Sterling and dueprocess.international or radasterling.com.
Thank you so much for being part of the panel. I appreciate it very much. And we'll catch you next time. This has been The Protagonists on The World Today. Drive carefully, have a great day, and be kind to your neighbours.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.